Okay, so I'm just picking up where we just left off. So we left off at data types. Okay, so in the last video, just to recap, we covered variables. We talked about what variables are, why they're important, and why you would need variables, right? They're very important to keeping track of users' information. We might need to reuse their data later on at some point in the application. So it's important that we store values inside variables for later use. Okay. All right, so let's talk about data types. Okay, so in programming, there are different data types. And what I mean by data types is I mean different types of data. Okay, obviously that doesn't really explain much, but let's dive a little bit deeper. Okay, so in the real world, there are different ways to represent data. You might represent data in numeric format. You might represent data in, text format, like strings. Well, I shouldn't say text, but, in string format. Okay, I've said strings a lot. Again, I'll explain. We're gonna get to that, so don't worry. You can represent data using objects, booleans, a bunch of different types. Okay, so data types themselves pretty much are kind of like their own, type. For example, so think of it like this: a number, 25, right? You can classify a number between. You can differentiate a number compared to a string, right? Let's say, for example, let's kind of relate Jack, or let's kind of relate the string Anson, right, to the number 25. We can see that Anson, right, it's wrapped in quotes. This is a string. This is a string literal, right? So we classify this type as a string. Okay, 25 itself, though, we could actually say 25 is a string. We'd wrap it in quotes. Okay, but we can also classify 25 as just a numeric value. Okay, now there's also booleans as well, but we're going to get into that. But first, let's talk about the numeric data type. So when it comes to data types, again, there are many different types of data types. In JavaScript, though, there's 7 data types. So we're only going to go over 6 of them because you're rarely going to use symbols. So don't worry so much about that. We're only going to go over these 6. So when it comes to numbers, it can be pretty much any numeric value. Integers, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I misspelled this. Doubles. So doubles are like floats, or they're pretty much like numbers with decimal points. So for example, 67.53, 0.4442, and etc. There's also big ints, small ints, medium ints, but JavaScript itself doesn't have like a explicit type for those. They just fall under the numeric type, but other languages might have those kinds of specific data types, and those types of numbers represent the size of the number itself, but you don't have to worry so much about that for now. Okay, so again, numeric values are not wrapped in quotes. So for example, if I wanted to keep track of someone's age, I would declare a variable called var age equals 18. Okay, so let me do this real quick. Let's go ahead and let's create another. Actually, let's do this in the same file. Let's delete all this. Let's go ahead and do var myAge, and let's assign this the value of 22. So right over here, I just assigned the literal value 22 to the variable myAge. So you can guess that if I log myAge to the console, you're going to see that it's going to say 22, right? Now the type of myAge, though. The type of myAge is a number, and then there's actually an operator called typeof that you can use to log the type of to check what the type is for a variable. So if I say type of myAge, it's going to say number. See, number. Likewise, if I say var myname equals Anson, console.log type of myname, it's going to say string. See that? Now, of course, obviously, we can have 22 to be a string if we just wrap it in quotes, but the whole point is that we can represent data in different types of ways. Obviously, we don't want to have everything in strings, and that's why we have different types of data. We have numeric values, we have booleans, we have objects, all that kind of stuff. So that's just to kind of like generalize the different types of data. Okay, and there's a couple of examples over here too. We have height in inches, which is also a numeric value. Time until destination in minutes. This is also a numeric value as well. All numeric values. Very straightforward. And you might guess that, yes, we can use these numeric values for arithmetic operations, performing, addition, subtraction, but we're going to cover that later on. So let's go over strings. So strings, again, I've mentioned strings probably so many times, but I haven't explained what a string is. Okay, you may have seen me using strings, but let's actually talk about what strings are. Okay, strings are pretty much just a sequence of characters. For example, your name is a sequence of characters. My name, Anson, A-N-S-O-N, this is just a sequence of characters, right? It has an order. A comes first, N, and then S-O-N. That's a sequence of characters. Typically, any kind of sequence of characters is considered a string. So this is a string, right? This is also a string. You can also type, for example, my favorite food is pizza. This is also a string as well. These are all strings, okay? And I have a couple of other examples over here too. And it's also important to note that strings are wrapped in quotes. Okay, you can wrap them in either double quotes, like I did over here, or you can wrap them in single quotes. So let's do this. Favorite food equals pizza, semicolon. And let's log, console log, favorite food, and you're going to see there's no difference. Whoops. Pizza, just like that. Perfect. Awesome. That's pretty much it. Strings are just a sequence of characters, okay? And they can contain any kind of character you want. So we can have a string like var random string. And we can just do any symbol, any number, all this stuff, all of these things. Do whatever you want, okay? That's a string right there. Cool. And you can think, you can kind of start to think like, why are strings useful? Well, strings are pretty much just, plain text, right? You'd use strings for a lot of reasons, such as, you may want a variable that can store the password, the username of someone's account. Those are usually represented in strings. You would not want to represent someone's, username in a numeric value, right? You would probably usually use, some kind of alphanumeric value, such as, their name concatenate with a number. Okay, so we can declare a couple strings, say var username equals Anson90, just for example. And then var password is just some random password, like this, right? Examples of strings. And you're going to be using strings all the time. Likewise, you're going to be using numeric values all the time. Okay, cool. Let's talk about Boolean. So Booleans are just pretty simple. They're another data type, and they're actually a logical data type. There's only two possible values for Booleans, either true or false. Now, pretty much all the time, you're going to be using Booleans to control the flow of a program, which we will cover later. But for now, let me just show you a couple of examples of a Boolean value. They they can only be the value true or false. Okay, so a good way you can think of it is like, let's say, for example, let's declare a variable called that will represent true or false to see if the person is a male or not. So in this case, var is male. We're going to say true because I am a male. I identify as a male. And we're going to say console.log is male. And if I log this, let me get rid of all this stuff because we don't need it. Okay. It's going to log true. Var is female. I am not a female, so we're going to set this value to false, right? Console.log is female. And you can see true, false. Pretty cool, right? So now you're probably wondering, wait a minute. What is stopping us from declaring is female, the string false, and is male, the string true? Now, this is one thing that I should address very early. So JavaScript itself is a dynamic programming language. So, for example, right now, we've only been using the keyword var to declare our variables. If you've come from different programming languages that are statically typed, such as Java, or TypeScript, for example, you typically use a keyword that represents the data type for the value that you're declaring the variable for. In this case, there's not really, these explicit, types that we need to declare because JavaScript is a dynamic programming language. So what that means is it uses type inference. So what that means is basically it's going to look at what the literal value is, and it's going to determine, and that's what it's going to use to determine the type. Okay, so in this case, the literal value here is a string. So in this case, is female. This is a string rather than a Boolean value. Okay, now since false, so true and false are actually reserved keywords as well, and again they represent the Boolean value, right? So if we change this to true or false, right, it uses type inference, and that means that true is Boolean value. So if we log it, it's going to say Boolean. And same thing with age. I mean, not age. Same thing with numeric values too. If I say var my age, right? There's nothing stopping me from doing 22 like this, right? All that's gonna do is it's going to infer that type. It's gonna say, hey, this is a string. So if we do console.log type of my age, you're gonna see that's gonna log string. But if I change this to just the numeric literal value 22, it's gonna log number. Okay, so this is pretty much the basic understanding of what's called type inference. Okay, we know what the type is, and that's what we're basing it on, if that makes sense. Okay, so hopefully that clarifies some confusion that you might have, because yes, we can technically declare, we can assign any value we want to these variables. Okay, and there can be some potential bugs and problems with this kind of type inference thing, and that's why there's TypeScript, which is statically typed. Or it can be statically typed, but we're not going to get into TypeScript for now. Okay, cool. And now that we've covered Boolean, let's go over to the other two data types, null and undefined. Okay, so you're gonna encounter these values quite often, but let's go over it. So null usually refers to the absence of a value. So what that means is it doesn't point to a valid address in memory, and different languages may have different meanings for null. But let's just say, for example, if you were let's say if you were calling some function, and let's say it had to return, you might not understand this whole concept of functions because we haven't gone over yet, but I'm trying to think of a better example. I guess a good example would be, let's just say if we don't know what the gender, let's say for example, we don't know what the gender of the baby is, right? So let's just say var gender of baby. We don't know what the gender of the baby is. It can either be a male or a female, but we don't know what it is yet. So let's give it the value null. Okay, and then we can later on do stuff with this. We can check to see if it's null, and if it's null, that means it's undetermined, and if it's not, then it's going to have either true or false, true being male or false being female. Okay, it's really tricky to explain null because all it really means is just the absence of a value. So gender of baby the variable itself doesn't really have a value. The value itself is null, but it doesn't really represent anything. Okay, it just means it's absent. Okay, so hopefully that part makes sense. Now let's talk about undefined. Okay, so undefined variables. Okay, so or the value undefined itself. So let's say, for example, if I declare this variable gender of baby. Okay, so far all I've done was I just declared it. I didn't do anything else with it. I didn't assign any value to it. But look what happens if I log this variable to the console. It's going to say undefined. The reason why is because we have not given this variable any definition. Okay, we have not assigned it any value. So since there's no value assigned to it, it's undefined. Okay, if I give it the value male, it's going to log male. Okay, so there's some differences between null and undefined. So don't think that they're both the same, but they both are falsy values though. So but we're not going to cover that right now, but I just wanted to kind of go over these two different types of data types, okay? Because you will eventually, encounter them a lot. But for now, all you gotta understand is null usually represents the absence of value, which means that perhaps you might, try to get some kind of value from some kind of function, but null was returned, which means that, the value is undetermined. And likewise with undefined, it usually refers to an expression with no defined value. So just like how we declared a variable, we didn't give it a value, so the value is undefined. Okay? Now, objects is also a very, very, very popular data type, but we aren't going to cover this for now because this is we're going to save this for later on. Okay, I don't want to jump right into objects because we haven't really covered the other stuff yet, but we will talk about objects later on. Okay? So the next thing I want to talk about is literals, or literals itself, because I've mentioned them a lot. Okay, now let's go over it. So literals are just fixed values. Okay, when I say fixed, what I mean by that is 5, the numeric value 5, will always be 5. And the string ansin, right? You guys know what strings are now. We've gone over it. Strings are a sequence of characters, or an array of characters if you want to be more fancier. The string ansin will always be ansin. These are fixed values. They're not going to change no matter what. Okay, so for example, if I do console.log, you may have seen earlier in previous examples, we did something like console.log my name is, right? And I said this was a string literal, right? A string literal. You're going to see that this string never changes. it's going to stay fixed just like that. Okay, that is what a literal is. It's fixed throughout the entire program. It never changes. Okay, it's kind of like a constant. However, variable values, right? Let's declare a variable. Let's say var my name. Okay, let's give the value Anson. You can see that my name is a variable. It's not a constant, so we can actually reassign the value this over time, right? Now, remember, literals are fixed values, whereas variable values itself, they may change over time unless declared as a constant. Okay, so what we're doing here though, right, we are assigning a string literal to a variable. So we're basically giving this variable the string literal Anson as the value. So if I console.log my name, if I log this variable to the console, it's going to say Anson, my name is, next line, Anson, right? I can then change this value to something else. I can change this to Jack. Okay, now notice how this string literal stays, right? We are not changing it. This is also string literal. This is constant. At no point can we go back and just, change this string literal. This is constant. It's going to stay fixed forever throughout the program. Okay, but we can change the value of a variable throughout the entire program. Okay, and logging my name again on line 5 is going to give us Jack because we changed it on line 4. So I wanted to explain that as well because it's important to understand the difference between a literal as well, between a literal and a variable. Okay, because some people get confused, right? Let's say for example, if I did console.log my name, you're probably wondering, well, what's the difference between lines 5 and 6? The difference is that on line 5, we are logging the value of the variable my name. This is a variable value, and the value of this variable is Jack, right? However, on line 6, we're logging the string literal my name. So this is going to literally log my name, like the actual string my name. If did I save it? No. You're going to see it says my name, right? So hopefully that clarifies some confusion. Some people do get confused on how to, log variables. So I wanted to clarify that out, the difference between a literal and a variable. And like in the previous example or previous video, I did show you guys that you can concatenate strings. So I can declare a couple of variables. Let's just say let's do this. Let's do this. Let's go ahead and say var my first name equals Anson. And I can also declare variables like this, comma, my last name, like this. Okay, and let's log both of these on the same line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say my name is, so we have this string literal. I'm going to use the plus operator. In this case, I'm actually concatenating strings together with variables. So I'm going to concatenate the string literal with the variable value, my first name, like that. I'm going to concatenate with another space because I want there to be a space between the first and the last name. And then after the space, I'm going to concatenate with my last name, like that. And let's run it. And you're going to see my name is Anson Fong. Perfect. Very, very simple. Cool. All right. I think that's really it with the whole explanation between literals and variable values. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, feel free to ask questions down below. And again, this is also just some other stuff. I think I've explained enough already, so we're going to skip this part. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it for when it comes to variables, data types, and literals. And this is just kind of like a summary. So I don't know if I did a summary in the last video when we talked about variables, but well, I think we talked about variables in this video. No, we talked about data types. Okay, but just to recap, remember, variables are just little storage boxes. We can place items in there and we can take it out whenever we want. Same thing in the program. We can, input, we can assign data, assign a value to a variable, and we can reuse it later on. Okay? And variables can represent different types of data, strings, numbers, booleans, etc. Okay? And there are different types of data types as well. We went over them, strings, numbers, booleans. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Literals, we just went over that. Difference between a literal value as well as a variable value. Okay, literals are fixed. Variable values may change over time. Okay, and I think that's pretty much it for this video. In the next video, we're going to talk about arithmetic operations. So I'm going to show you guys how to perform arithmetic, programmatically. But a couple things that I I guess I should mention, or something that you could do on your own. I guess maybe since right now we don't know too much, but we know enough that we can write a simple program where we can declare a couple variables, store our names, favorite food, and favorite month. So I don't know, maybe do this exercise for fun and see how far you can go. Be a little bit creative with what you know so far. And yeah, so I will see you guys in the next video. Peace, guys.